What's going on, everybody? Thank you for tuning in. I want to talk to you today about 3 things that you can do to start to increase your sales, whether you're a sales professional, whether you're an entrepreneur, small business owner, or if you're an executive or in a management team or actually operating a larger business as well. Regardless, it's all going to come down to these same 3 principles that you can do today to increase your sales, increase your revenues, in turn, increase your profits, increase your income. And I'd be more than happy to share that with you and see you get those results, and then share that with me in the comments below. Let's get into it. To start off with tip number 1, let me just tell you, a lot of sales professionals and entrepreneurs who come to me for advice around increasing their sales, increasing their revenues in their business, really scaling their businesses, want some elaborate or some complex tip or advice or something they can build into their sales systems or sales processes. And a lot of times we do that, but that comes many steps down the line as opposed to starting with that right from the get-go. One thing that I do right from the very beginning is I look at activity levels and the levels of action, the levels of outflow, the outbound activity levels, how they're handling the inbound leads and the inbound activity. And that's the number 1 metric that I look to measure and that I look at when I'm looking at a sales professional's performance, or I'm looking at a business's sales or revenues. It's the activity levels. Before we look at anything else, before we tweak and adjust anything in your sales process, before we look at your closing, before we look at your team culture, before we look at anything else, we have to look at activity levels. So if you're a sales professional, are you taking action at the levels that you really need to be in order to map to your goals and to your ambitions? If you're an entrepreneur or a business owner, are you and your team taking enough levels of action to reach your goals and targets? And the reality is, more often than not, the answer is no. You're not taking enough levels of action, of activity, to actually guarantee your goals, to guarantee your targets, to guarantee you hit these sales metrics that you've set for yourself or for your team. So what I want you to do is start to do double the amount of action or activity or outflow that you're currently doing and see what happens to your numbers. Just do double. If you're making cold calls and you're normally doing 100 cold calls, try to fit in and do 200 cold calls that day. If you're sending out messages on social media, if you're doing outbound activities elsewhere, if you're knocking doors, whatever you're doing, try to double your activity levels in the day, in the week, in the month, and then look at what happens to your numbers. Look at what happens. This is known as the law of averages. And the reality is, in the beginning, or when things aren't going well for you, you have to make up in numbers what you lack for in skill or what you lack for in opportunity. Now let's go to step number 2 for increasing your sales, increasing your revenues, and being able to scale your business ultimately. And step number 2 is starting to look at your sales processes and your sales systems and making sure that they're, 1, efficient. And the second part of that is you want your sales processes and systems to be duplicatable. So if you're a sales professional and looking at it from the lens of a salesperson, you want your process to be duplicatable. So you want the same process to work every single time. You want to be able to duplicate your process regardless of what prospect you're sitting in front of, or whether it's over the phone or on Zoom or face-to-face sales, or if you go into a different industry with a completely different product or service. As long as your sales processes and systems and steps are duplicatable, you can ensure that same level of success in any area. And if you're an entrepreneur or a business owner, it's very clear why you want your sales systems and processes to be duplicatable. And the reason is you want to hire more people, you want to scale your teams, you want to build your sales teams bigger and bigger, and have everybody duplicate the same processes, duplicate the same systems, and ultimately duplicate the same results. And finally, step number 3 to increase your sales, scale your business, and get to the goals that you want, and the reason you're in business in the first place, is your follow-up game. What's your follow-up game like? Are you even doing any follow-up? Do you even have any follow-up systems, scripts, processes in place? Do you have any always that you have with your follow-up? Meaning you always do certain things. You always follow up following certain steps. You always touch base with a prospect after a sales call. You always touch base with a prospect within 24 to 48 hours, within 3 days, within 7 days, within the month. Do you have some rules and some principles that you follow when it comes to follow-up? And this is different for every business, for every industry. This is a lot of times up to the preference of the business owner or the entrepreneur and how they'd like to conduct their business, the brand and the image that they like to uphold, how aggressive they want to be. As a sales professional, it's all on you. So you better have a follow-up system in place. You better have a system where you're tracking all of your calls, all of your sales, and you're checking in with all of your prospects. you know where everybody is in terms of where they are in their buying cycle and how close they are to making a final decision. That's all on you as a sales professional, and you should really take ownership for the entire business like it's your own. And that's how you can get to management, executive positions, become a shareholder, become a business owner ultimately, and then run your own show because you've built the right habits and learned the right skills on someone else's dime, which is totally fine. And that's something you should do when you're young in sales. And as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you need to have follow-up because most sales, most deals are not closed on the first interaction, especially for a longer sales cycle, for higher ticket items. So what follow-up systems do you have in place for your team to follow, so that you can take yourself out of the sales process and go and work on the business, work on the direction and the vision of the business, but make sure that deals are still getting done, you're still helping people through your products and services, and your team is able to handle that with or without you. So there you have it. I'm gonna leave it at that because I don't wanna overburden you guys with information. I wanna make sure you take and actually implement just what I've discussed here. This should be enough to completely change the game for you over the next month, 2 months, 3 months. Again, step number 1 was levels of activity and making sure you have high levels of action, high levels of activity. Number 2 was looking at your sales processes and your systems and making sure they're efficient and duplicatable. And number 3 was your follow-up game, making sure that you have a follow-up system in place, you have follow-up processes in place, and that you follow up with every single prospect every single time until you have a conclusion, until you have an answer. Whether that's a yes or a no, totally fine, as long as you follow up until you have an answer. Those are 3 steps to increase your sales, be able to scale your business, and I hope that helped. And if it did, make sure to smash that like button, comment your thoughts below, share this video with more and more people, more sales professionals, and more entrepreneurs that you know. Share it with your colleagues, with your employees, with your teammates, to also help them get the results that they want in their business and in their lives. And on that note, I'll see you in the next video.